All right, everybody. I had the amazing honor today to interview Kristofor Healey. He is a friend of mine that I was fortunate enough to meet on one of our Wild Man experiences I did with our mutual friend, Johnny L. Sasser. But this guy brings a lot to the table, and you're going to hear it. He has been through any type of adversity that you could possibly think of, and his mindset and the way that he approaches that adversity is it's unbelievable. And so we talk about things from where he planned his future to go, what he got caught into, what 9/11 had as an impact on his trajectory in life, and then the adversity he had with races and competition, and then adopting and raising two beautiful girls as well. And he is in leadership. He's a mentor. He coaches. He's written books, so he's an author as well. I mean, this dude's done literally everything. If you go to KristoforHealey.com, you'll be able to see some of this stuff. But he has a podcast, The Indispensable Man. He has a book called Indispensable, The Tactical Plan for the Modern Man. I mean, you name it, and this guy, again, he's accomplished it. He's achieved it. So it's a little bit longer of an episode. For that reason, we've been able to dive into so many divisions in his life that I don't think you're going to be able to stop once you start. And it may be another one where you want to listen to it a couple times or share it with somebody who may think that their life is in a tough spot right now and they need that mindset shift to be able to figure out that plan, that trajectory change that you need to be successful in life. So strap in, love it, rate it, review it, listen to it 50,000 times if you want to. It's an amazing episode, and thanks as usual for tuning in, guys. All right, everybody. So I have an awesome guest here today. I've got Chris Healey. This is a guy that I met. I was fortunate enough to meet when I went down to the Wild Man experience. He and I had been in conversation just via Instagram and the DMs there for a little bit, but then it was nice to be able to put a face to a name. But Chris, you're here with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day in your beautiful new home to share some time with me.
Yeah, glad to be here, Jacque. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, brother. So, when we met down in Corpus Christi, we immediately connected because of the Maine, the Maine association between you growing up in Maine, my wife growing up in Maine, and we just started talking back and forth. Conversation came super easy, and some of the things that also came through that conversation wasn't just where you lived, but also who you are as a person. And I know that our good friend Johnny kind of used you as a leadership and a mentor kind of with these experiences, but your leadership role, your love for, your expertise in law enforcement, because I saw how you're able to shoot a gun and clear rooms and stuff. It was fantastic to watch. I was like, art. But then also your absolute love and adornment for your family, being a father and adopting those beautiful little girls over there. So I want to be able to dive into all of that here today. Where would you like to start, my friend?
Oh man, take me wherever. I guess I don't have the family that I have or the life that I have without my career in law enforcement. I don't have that career in law enforcement if I don't grow up in Maine. So I guess we start from the start. And
there you go.
Yeah, let's talk Maine. I know this is wild because your wife grew up literally like the other side of the town line from me. So I think that's just such a small world coincidence.
Yeah, for sure, man. And growing up in Maine, for you, and I know it was different from her, and actually Megan and I just had this conversation about that. A lot of people stay there, right? And they don't leave, and they don't really broaden or go outside of that. But how did you get into the law enforcement piece? And then how did you now end up in Texas? How did all of these pieces come together for you?
Yeah, so you nailed it. Maine has, for those who don't know, Maine has a population of about maybe 2 million people. Now, when I was growing up, it was probably 1.5 million, something like that. And to put that into perspective, the city of San Antonio has like 2 million people in and of itself, right? Phoenix has probably that many people or close to it. So the entire state, we joke about this a lot, but when you grow up in Maine, it is very similar to that 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon game, where the odds are really good that if you know someone from Maine, that I'm going to know that person. And it's kind of a running joke, but it happens, and it's proven time and time again. If your wife and I sat down and talked, we would know dozens of people that overlap just by proximity and by growing up in that state. And so you're right, absolutely. A lot of people stay there. People don't leave. People are very insular. It's isolated. It only borders one other state. So there's only a very small section of it that borders New Hampshire, and the rest of it borders Canada or the Atlantic Ocean. So it feels kind of like an island. There's really one way in, one way out. You go up 95 and that's pretty much it. So moving there as a 6-year-old, my family moved around a little bit. I was born in Illinois. We lived in Pennsylvania for a bit, and then eventually up in Maine. Moving up there as a 6-year-old, I kind of was seen as an outsider for the last 10 plus years of my life before I graduated high school. I never outgrew that you're not from here because you're not a native. And so it's a very insular, very kind of, it's off the beaten path a little bit. You have to want to go to Maine to end up there. Nobody accidentally finds themselves in Maine. And so growing up there, I had no intention or desire really to leave. Most of my friends are still there. The guys I grew up with, they might have gone to college in Boston and then worked for a couple of years in Boston. Then they eventually matriculate back and they raise their families there. And it's a great place for that. I went to the University of Maine. I, graduated from there. I had gotten into graduate school, was intending to go back. And that was the summer of 2001. And so fall of 2001, I had an anthropology degree. I was working in the field. I was planning on taking a gap year before going back to pursue my graduate degree and eventual PhD in archaeology. I had that in my mind. I wanted to work as a professor at the University of Maine. I had the whole thing mapped out. And then I'm working in the field on September 11th in down East Maine, which is Machias. And I come back in out of the field where we, of course, had back at that time, very little cell phone service, no towers. And that little Nextel brick that I had starts blowing up when I get back into Machias. And I start checking my voicemail and I start hearing this worry in people's voices. And I turn on SportsCenter expecting to see Red Sox highlights and I see the towers collapsing. Yeah. And so I might have been the last person on the East Coast to know that we had been attacked. It's, 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, and I'm finding this out. And that was when kind of the perspective about what I wanted to do with my life changed. And immediately just seeing the heroism on display, seeing what was happening on 9/11, it turned my head. It made me want to go in that direction. It made me want to go into law enforcement. And so I started applying. And the first place that I thought to apply with was what everybody thinks, which is the FBI. I didn't know anything else. I had no real experience with law enforcement, but I knew I wanted to stop this from happening again. So I called the recruiter in Boston and I said, hey, I've got a college degree. It's in anthropology. Is there any way you could use me? And he's, basically says, pats me on the head a little bit. Appreciate the interest, bud, but unless you speak Urdu or Farsi or Arabic, or unless you've got tactical skills from being a SWAT operator or in the military, we're really closed to recruiting right now. And so I had this kind of period where I desperately wanted to serve, and I knew the way I wanted to serve, but I had to wait until this hiring freeze passed and I could get on with the new Department of Homeland Security, which by basically spring of 2002 was being discussed and being set up. So it took a couple of years after 9/11 for me to get on board, but I got hired in late 2006. I tested in 2005, had to go through the whole process, took about 14 months to get on board. And in 2006, I got hired on and left Maine for Texas, 2,600 miles away. The duty station I got was in the Rio Grande Valley. So anyone who's familiar with kind of the news with what's going on right now on the border, especially with Title 42 about to expire, that's where I was. They sent me from northern New England to 2,600 miles away to Harlingen, Texas, place I'd never heard of, place I'd never been. I packed everything that I had that I could fit into the back of a Dodge Dakota pickup truck and took off. And that's kind of how I ended up in Texas.
I love it, man. And the story of how you got inspired to do it. I mean, I feel like, a lot of people may have felt that way, but in terms of the follow through it, like you got denied from the FBI, and some people are like, well, maybe that's not my calling, but you still maintain that passion. You're just like, well, I know I need to do something with this. So you kept fighting forward. And this is a piece of that leadership piece that I see in you, where you put your mind to it and you're driven and you're going to do what it takes to be able to achieve that outcome. And, getting you down into Texas, completely different climate. If you've never been down there before, like it's hot as hell in Texas. Like it's a different beast down there. But you were able to go through with that, and with being a part of that division, right? It was with Homeland Security that you had the biggest cybercrime bust. Is that right?
Yeah. So fast forward a little bit. I initially got hired by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So at the time, all the advertising was based around, I didn't know anything about what the acronyms meant or what, what agency did what. I just knew I wanted to serve, and the new Department of Homeland Security was created, and what they had done was kind of this Frankenstein sort of department. They took all these bits and pieces from these other federal departments and they put them all under the same umbrella. So they took the old INS, and that became Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The old Customs became Customs and Border Protection. They kind of took all these different agencies and put them together under the Department of Homeland Security to kind of respond to the next 9/11, to prevent the next 9/11.
Yeah.
And so I applied for all of them. I applied for Border Patrol. I applied for Customs and Border Protection. I applied for ICE. I applied for anything that was opened up and hiring as soon as they opened up. I went and I took the test for all of them. And I just said, whoever offers me a job first is where I'll go. And that was just based on I had this aching feeling that I watched what happened on 9/11. I saw these guys act so heroically. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't have the background or the skill set to be hired as a special agent just yet. So I had to do something in uniform. And so I said, whichever position I can get, I'll take. So I even applied for the Park Service, man. I was like, if there's a badge and a gun and a uniform, put it on me so that I can get that experience, so that I can become a special agent and I can go and investigate. And so I initially thought, all the advertising was about stopping terrorism because, they're appealing to a patriotic sense of patriotism. And so my first few days on the job, after going through the academy and doing all that stuff, kind of getting my feet under me in Texas, I realized very quickly that, we're dealing with a very porous border. We're dealing with an area where anybody can be coming across. But by and large, I was not going to be dealing with terrorism in South Texas. So I was mostly going to be dealing with narcotics trafficking, human trafficking, and that sort of stuff. And that requires a certain, to be very effective at that job. You probably shouldn't look like me. You shouldn't be like the pale skin white boy from Maine. It's hard to do undercover work in deep South Texas when you're not a native Spanish speaker. And so I found myself struggling a little bit as I became a special agent, as I became an investigator after I transitioned from uniform. I found myself struggling to find where my best assets could be used. And what I found was that investigating fraud was something I was natural at. I was very good at. I was very good at chasing the money, following the paperwork. I was very good at writing search warrants. I was very good at getting into people's email accounts. I was good at the tech aspect of it. And I found it to be a challenge that I really embraced. And on top of that, not a lot of people in my office were interested in that. They liked doing the dope cases. They liked doing the human trafficking cases. So a lot of stuff started to fall on my desk. And, I got one that was like, hey, people in the Houston area have been getting these phone calls that are from the quote unquote IRS. And they're getting phone calls from, other government agencies like ICE threatening them with deportation. And what was happening is these individuals, you've probably gotten these calls, these individuals were receiving these telephone calls, they're getting threatened, and they would go and buy gift cards, and they would, at the direction of the callers, they would scratch, they'd load them up with a couple $1,000s, scratch off the numbers on the back, tell the callers, and the callers would then take that money and then through a complex series of transactions would launder it. And I started looking into that, thinking at first, this is probably going nowhere. I'm not going to be able to catch these guys. It's too tech savvy. And then 7 years later, we had over 20 of them in jail, including a guy that I went to Singapore to put handcuffs on and brought all the way back to the U.S. And it was the largest telefraud case in U.S. history. And so, I guess it speaks to the power of not giving up, the power of not quitting, the power of leaning into what you're good at, standing in that batter's box and taking swings until you get the home run. And that was kind of what made my career.
Yeah, I love it, man. And, embracing the unknown, because there's a lot of that with where you're going down to Texas, trying to find where you fit in. But again, that tenacity of never quitting because you knew that you had a higher purpose. And like, to me, hearing you say it, I'm like, oh, it seems like it was a very smooth transition. Like, oh, it's very lovely because like you're very elegant at telling the story. But what type of challenges, besides obviously not fitting the look, what other challenges and stuff did you face? I mean, I know, again, moving from Maine, like, were there naysayers from Maine thinking you were crazy? Like, what were some of these other things? Because I know a lot of listeners, a lot of my patients struggle with that insecurity. They're fearful of doing something without somebody else's approval. Did you suffer with any of that?
Oh, for sure. And the best part of life is on the other side of that fear, right? So
Yeah.
finding that edge and then pushing beyond it a little bit kind of became addictive to me. I was terrified.
Yeah.
There was nobody in my family had military. I mean, my grandfathers both served, one at the very tail end of World War II in the Navy Reserve. The other one was in, the Air Force during the Korean War. So like, I didn't have that immediacy of military service or law enforcement. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't really have anyone I could lean on or talk to. I just knew that I wanted to go and I needed to change of pace and I needed to, Maine is a place where if you stay there, you're going to be there for the rest of your life. If you don't get out and
Yeah.
spread your wings a little bit, you're probably going to stick around for the rest of your life. And I knew that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to get out there and see the world. I wanted to contribute and be a part of something bigger than myself. But I was terrified, and my friends were all like, "What are you doing? You've never been to Texas. Why do you want to do this? What makes you think you can do this? Like, you're going to fail." The attitude was kind of like, "We'll see in a couple months when you fail out of the academy."
Yeah.
So I had that attitude going in, and so I was prior to the academy that entire summer. I knew I had it's essentially a notice that you're going to be hired. So you get told
Okay.
like you're just waiting for an academy date, and that could be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. You have no idea. It could be 30 days.
Okay.
But I had gotten that in the summer, and I knew, okay, I've got at some point in the next 6 months, they're going to ship me off to South Georgia, and I better be ready for it. So I was running. I mean, I was a high school lacrosse player and high school soccer player. I had some of that still in me, but I was running, I was lifting weights, I was doing spin classes. I was just fully dedicated to getting prepared because I was terrified I was going to show up at the academy and I was going to be getting cut because I was the last guy in the run or I couldn't hack it. And what I found was it was kind of the opposite. I actually, because I was pushing myself constantly to not be the worst, I ended up being at the top of my class in most of those respects. When it came to the 1.5 mile run, when it came to all the PT tests, I was leading the charge, and that felt pretty good. But I let that self-doubt and that doubt that others cast on me fuel me and
Yeah.
make me pursue it even harder. And that's kind of been a theme of my life.
Yeah.
It's like,
I love it, man.
yeah, it's not easy. None of it's easy, but nothing that's worth doing is, right. Like becoming a doctor isn't easy. Like you moved all over the country to pursue what you were happy about or wanted to do. So once you feel that bug, once you recognize what your desires are, what your drivers are, what your values are, you won't be slowed down. You'll continue to go after it. And so that's just kind of, I don't have any special skills or special talent. I'm not, I wasn't born, like good looking or extremely wealthy or with a giant brain. I just don't know how to stop. And I think that is going to get you further in life than almost any other thing.
Yeah, and I love that you used it as fuel as your fire. And as you were saying that, I was visualizing besides fire, I was thinking water. It's like when you're out in the ocean. Not that I know how to surf, but I've seen people do it. But it's calm out there for a certain period, and then all of a sudden you see this wave start to roll in, and you have two options. Either you try to go, I guess three, go over it and just say, nope, not for me. You get pummeled by it, or you're like, oh, let's see what the hell is going to happen here. And you get up on your board and you ride it. And again, if you look back, if it's possible, if you look back, you'll see it's still nice and calm where you used to be. And a lot of people, as soon as they get up there, they start having more insecurity, more doubt, more fear, because we ultimately fear the unknown. And when we look back, it's like, it was so much easier back there. And then you have friends, you have family. They're like, just come back. It's so easy. It's so easy. But for you, I mean, once you're on that wave, dude, you're just like, let's go. I know point A was over there. Point B is over there. This is where I know I need to go or want to go. And then you just rode it with momentum, and your wave just kept getting bigger and bigger for you. And, being an endurance athlete as well, so you stepped into the physical aspect of it. I mean, you basically embraced all areas of just human optimization, basically.
Yeah, I did never optimize as well as I could have, but yeah, I wish I'd known a little bit more about nutrition when I was racing Ironman. But yeah, I got down to Texas and I found that I enjoyed. I had been a high school athlete and I had played like I had been the captain of my lacrosse team and all that stuff. I was pretty decent, but in college, I just played club sports and fraternity, intramurals and stuff like that. So I wasn't really calibrated for that. And when I got out of the academy, I was probably fitter than I'd ever been in my life. It was like 3 months of just marching everywhere and PT and running and push-ups and everything. And there's 80% dudes. There's no, there's no women on campus. I didn't have a car, so there was nowhere to go. So it was just like,
Yeah.
I guess I'll work out. And then all your meals are taken care of. So you're just like crushing protein. So I was in
Yeah.
a great space coming out of the academy. I wanted to maintain that. And I found myself when I got down to the Rio Grande Valley, I don't know if you spent when you were in Texas, if you got down there at all, but it's one of the most unhealthy places in the United States. And the Rio Grande Valley, for those that don't know, is Hidalgo County, Cameron County, Willacy County, Starr County, Zapata County. It's basically these like 5 or 6 counties right along the border with Mexico. And it's cut off in large part by the King Ranch, which is bigger than the state of Rhode Island. So between Corpus Christi and then, several hours south, about 3 hours south, there's this big, gigantic, privately owned stretch of land that kind of divides Texas from this most southern point, the most southern tip of Texas. I was down there. And so not only was it, I was like in a majority minority place where there were maybe 10% of the population were white, majority Hispanic. I was also in a place where the diet was that, I mean, you've eaten Tex-Mex food, a lot of lard, a lot of fat, a lot of the way it's cooked is not super healthy. And then the heat
Right.
and the way that people acted down there, people tend to be very sedentary because the heat is overwhelming and overpowering for about 8-9 months out of the year. So it all kind of combines into this very unhealthy population. So high levels of diabetes, extremely high levels of any sort of like obesity-based illness is going to be present in the population there. COVID hit terribly hard down there because just these preconditions that people were living with. And we got down there, or I got down there, nobody was running, nobody was biking, nobody was doing triathlon. And I found myself wanting to kind of maintain that fitness level I came out of the academy with. And so I started running. I bought a road bike. I started biking. And when you start doing that stuff, people look at you funny and they kind of wonder what you're up to. But then you start to identify and find the other handful of unicorns in the population that are doing the same thing. You kind of band together. We created a running team. We created a triathlon team. I met my wife and the two of us started kind of racing together. And by the time I left the Rio Grande Valley 10 years later, they were hosting multiple marathons, half marathons, triathlons. And I like to think my wife and I had a lot to do with that by leading at the front of that, by getting out there on the roads and running and racing and training and showing other people, hey, there's a different lifestyle out there that you can maintain that makes you feel so much better at the end of the day than what you're doing right now. So I wouldn't say I optimized, but I definitely I definitely went further than I ever thought I could. And a lot of that came from, I mean, we grew up in the same era. When you're a kid and you watch that Wide World of Sports on ABC, and they would show the Ironman once a year out of Kona, out of Hawaii. And I would see that, and I would look at that and say, golly, I could never do that. They're running a marathon after a 112-mile bike, which is after a 2.4-mile swim. I could never. How do you do that? How do you do that all in one day in under 17 hours? How's that even possible? And as I started racing my first half marathon, my first ultra marathon, I started riding longer and longer distances, just eating that elephant one bite at a time. All of a sudden, those big sort of crazy goals start to feel more achievable. And 10 years ago this month, I did my first Ironman, did 6 more in kind of rapid succession. And it just became a way of life. And it stopped being about, I can't do that, and started being about measuring, instead of measuring the gap between me and the people that I thought I could never be, I started measuring the gain between who I was and where I was now. And then everything else in that gap became much more possible.
Do you feel like you have to explain that, or you get to explain that a lot of times, like in the leadership side of things, where it's like focus on the small improvements that you're doing to make things easier to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, and I tell this to my kids as a dad, this is like a huge thing. Like, we cannot ever measure ourselves based on who we think we should be. We need to measure ourselves based on who we were yesterday and who we are today, right? There is no should. Like, there's, what's the effort that I'm putting in? What is my character? What is my character? What are my skills? What are my beliefs? And how am I applying those today to be a better person tomorrow? And the story I like to tell is, there's a book it's called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster? And it's based on, like, I think it's the 2000 British rowing team. And this rowing team wanted to compete in the Olympics. They hadn't won an Olympic medal in like 50 years. And The new coach for this team came in and basically told them everything that we are doing is based around this one question. That one question is, will it make the boat go faster? And so your question, if I'm going to go to a party tonight, I got invited to go out to the bars tonight, will this make the boat go faster? I got invited to do X, Y, and Z. Will it make the boat go faster? I've got this cupcake in my hand. Will it make the boat go faster? And if you start framing yourself around every little thing that you do could potentially make you 1% better, all of a sudden those 10 and 15 and 20% betters just happen by design because you're focused on the little things. Coach Belichick, I'm New England guy. I'm a Patriots fan.
Of course.
Apologies. But Coach Belichick talks about this. Coach Saban talks about this. It's called process thinking. And process thinking is if you've ever watched anything about Coach Saban, he talks about this all the time. In fact, at Alabama, they call it the process. The idea is you don't ever look at the scoreboard. You don't care what's on the scoreboard. You care about the 7 seconds in front of your nose. So that the average football play lasts 7 seconds. If you can win that 7 seconds, you just keep stacking those 7-second wins. The scoreboard takes care of itself. The national rankings take care of themselves. The national title game takes care of itself. The Super Bowl takes care of itself because you're focused on those 7 seconds in front of your face. And once you start adopting that mindset, those big victories become much, much easier. And I think guys have a lot of hard time because they see the finished product, right? They walk by, they see the copy of Men's Health magazine with whichever Marvel action stars workout they're highlighting is on it, right? And they see the chiseled abs. And what they don't see is, the time and the effort in the gym and the consistency and the things that needed to happen on a day-to-day basis to get to that point. They just think, I'm just going to do keto for a couple of weeks and I'll shred up, right?
Yeah.
And it's changing that mindset too. Guys, we have to be thinking about daily victories. What we measure, we can manage. So we need to be measuring every single day. We need to be looking at what did I do today? What could I have done better? What worked? What didn't? How do I adjust? How do I move forward? And if we're not kind of in the work every single day, we're never going to get better. We're always going to be thinking about I want instead of I did. And it's that simple. I mean, you don't have to have any special skill set to achieve what you want to achieve in this world, whether it's physical, athletic, from a career perspective. You just have to have the willpower to keep showing up and asking that question, will it make the boat go faster?
I love it. And I haven't read that. I haven't heard that. That's really good. And I think from like my patient's perspective, like when I do like different changes and stuff where they know where they want to be, they know where they are right now. If they focus just on where they want to be and they don't focus on doing the small things day in and day out, it could get very overwhelming. And, you talk about your kids a lot, and, I talk about mine. We just had this issue yesterday with our son. He brought home like 50 stacks of like work that he did at school. It was awesome. He did a great, great job, but he took it out of his lunchbox and there's too much for him to be able to handle. And the rule is you don't leave anything in mom's car. So get your lunchbox, get your water bottle, get your papers, get it out. You should not even have been seen in the car. Like no trace of you should be in the car. And he got overwhelmed by it. And he was like, it's too much. I can't do it. It's impossible. Like it's going to take forever. It's, oh my God. And so he just keeps like just destroying himself and working on destroying his confidence. And I'm like, okay, well, how can we slowly increase your tolerance of this stuff? And it could be, hey, you have 100 pieces of paper, take 20 pieces of paper at a time, bring them in, 20, bring them in, 20, bring them in. And we can sit here and just fuss about how long it could take, or we could just pick it up and it'll take less time than you sitting here thinking about how long it's going to take. So there's different life lessons to be learned at a 40-year-old age that are also applicable to, being in your 30s, 40s, 50s, however old you are. And I think it's really important that we focus on these things because we can easily put ourselves down and think it's impossible. And you've kind of shown it's not impossible.
No, and that's the biggest thing. Like the Iron Man, one of their themes is impossible is nothing, or anything is possible, right? And so we start to change our mindset. And this is when I was coaching Ironman and coaching ultramarathon athletes. One thing that I would always tell them, because they would get overwhelmed with the idea of 140.6 miles or a 50K trail run. Like, of course you're overwhelmed by that. It's a ridiculous idea to do that. Like the human body trying to perform that is just, it's foolish. And I'm sure you're getting secondhand cringe as a doctor thinking about it, but
it's okay.
But there is a mindset game that we have to play where we have to look at it as, I already am that thing because I've showed up today. right? And so like the day that I crossed the start line, it'll be 10 years ago, this week as we're recording, when I raced my first Ironman. I showed up at the start line terrified, right? I had done the 100+ mile bike ride time and time again. I'd run 4 marathons in the 4 months leading up to my race to prep for it. I had done a half Ironman a month prior where I finished first in my age group and qualified for the national championship. I was not unprepared,
Yeah.
but I showed up at the start line like pissing my pants. I was so scared.
Yeah.
I was like, how am I going to do this? It's a hot day. I mean, it's in the woodlands, for God's sake. Like, the woodlands. It's like the woodlands in May. It was 115 degrees. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, with that's with humidity. That wasn't like the ground temp.
Yeah.
That was like the real feel. And so, I'm like, how am I going to survive this? And I had to stop myself. I had to stop that. I had to say, stop. You have not heard Mike Riley say you are an Ironman as you cross the finish line yet, but you're going to hear that today because you've done the work. Everything that made you an Ironman happened before this moment. Everything that made you an Ironman happened before this moment. You cannot control whether you're going to get a flat on the bike or whether you're going to get, sideswiped and end up in a wreck or break an arm, or you're going to whatever.
Sure.
Any millions of things can happen out on the course that you cannot control. What you can control right now, though, is the hay is in the barn, and you are here and you're prepared and you are ready. And everybody in this field has done all that work, and you have too, and you deserve to be here. You are an Ironman just by showing up today. And once I made that quick switch in my head, once I was able to kind of get into the water and look around and see the people cheering and kind of like listen to the countdown, waiting for the cannon to go, I started to get excited. That attitude changed from terror to, let's do this. Let's go. We're here. You're here because you belong here. And you start becoming your own little kind of hype man. And you start getting yourself like, the steps that I took to get to this point, I chopped away, and the tree's about to fall over. It's just going to take a stiff breeze, and it's going to fall over at this point. And so if you can get in that mindset of celebrating the day, of celebrating the gain, if you can get in that gain mentality day to day of celebrating, I'm 1% better than I was yesterday. The things that I did today set me up for a better tomorrow. And the way I do that, I mean, I've got stacks of journals here, but I write in a journal every single day, every single morning. What am I going to accomplish today? I give myself, 3 goals, 3 things on my power list. And at the end of the day, I ask myself, did I move the ball? How did I do? I give myself a grade. So I measure so that I can manage the next day, and I measure again so I can manage the next day. And you don't accomplish those big things. It's exactly what you're telling your kids. Like I have this discussion with my 10-year-old all the time. She's non-ambulatory, but when she came to us, when we adopted her in 2019, the very end of 2019, she had never had a single minute of physical therapy. She'd never had access to a walker. She'd never had access to anything that could build strength in her legs. Now, so she couldn't walk 5 steps back then at 6 years old. Now she's 10 years old and she's got a walker and she walks. She did field day at school the other day. She was walking around the track with her friends. Like she's having a major surgery this summer that's going to help do reconstruction on those feet and give her even more of an advantage. I see it every single day in her. I see, and when she gets that mindset of, I don't know how I'm ever going to finish this. Like, look at what you're doing right now. Don't tell me you can't finish this, girl. You're walking. I mean, you came to us and you'd never even, she had baby feet at 6 years old. Yeah. So, how she'd never used them before. So it's mindset, man. Everything is mindset.
Yeah, and you brought in a good segue into another thing that, I wanted to make sure that we were able to talk about, because what some people could potentially hear is like, oh, he makes this look so easy, like his life must be so easy. Everything you do is very smoothly integrated into your life, but you've got a nonverbal and a non-ambulatory daughter over there, and your days aren't exactly the easiest. I mean, they're full of love and blessings, but I mean, you just got a new house because it was difficult carrying her up and down the stairs. So life isn't as peachy as it might seem, but you're doing an amazing job with it. And, I think these girls were called to you guys for a reason, between your wife and her knowledge and her health adventures and all that stuff kind of stacks together beautifully with you guys. And that's one of you had your professional, number one thing a professional accomplishment. But then when it comes to your humanity and your personal accomplishment, the biggest thing you've accomplished is the adoption of these two. So what was that process like, and how does that play out into your life every day?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I kind of had this conversation. I was on Johnny's podcast and we talked about a little bit about building strong marriages. And, I think a lot of where our marriage is strong and where our family is strong is because we've never been afraid to do hard things. And I think a lot of people, they hit adversity in their marriage or in their life or at some point in their life, and that can be the breaking point because we live in this 21st century world where everything is Amazon Prime and DoorDash and drive-through and everything's easy. And when things get a little bit hard, when you get punched in the face by life, you don't know how to handle it. And there's a great saying by the Stoic philosopher Seneca. He says essentially that like fire is the test of gold, so is adversity to strong men. And so we become stronger when we face something hard and a challenge. And so whether that is, in a professional setting, whether that was, chasing down, criminals all over the world and trying to bring them to justice, whether that's, relocating and moving across country and putting your feet down in a new place and trying to figure it out, whether that's racing Ironmans or ultra endurance sports, all those things you're pushing yourself to find your edge and push beyond it. And so for me, adoption was another kind of, was another threshold to see what we could endure and see how we could get beyond it. And adoption was always our plan A. We never really had in our minds any other path towards parenthood. And my wife was in college. She worked with a family that adopted a little girl, and so she was their nanny. She had a professor who had adopted 2 little girls from China, so she was exposed to that and well aware of the process. And so we were, a lot of people are intimidated and scared by it. They think it takes years and years, and it does if you're not dedicated to getting to the finish line. And for us, we kind of came into it with the mentality of we're ultra endurance athletes. Like we finish things, like we're used to we're finishing a 140-mile race in a single day. I'm going to get to my daughter faster than you can. That was kind of my attitude. Like, so if something, came in, we're dealing with, again, the dichotomy of control. There's what you control and there's what you don't. The things that you do not control are how a government agency in the United States or the adoption agency or a government agency in China is how long they're going to take to process the paperwork. But what you do control is your ability to get things done and move the ball forward on your end. And if you are Johnny on the spot with that stuff, if you take care of that and you move the ball forward on your end, you're going to keep knocking those dominoes down. And so we just focused on that. We focused on what we could control. And there were moments of adversity. There were times when, something got screwed up in some agency and it put a 15-day delay on things and we'd be upset, but we'd turn around and say, okay, what can we do next? And so it was always plan A for us to go down that route. We knew what we were getting into. We understood and knew that our first daughter, when we went together, we adopted out of birth order. So my younger daughter actually came to us first in 2017. We thought she was epileptic. We thought she was deaf because that's what the file said. It turns out she has a rare chromosome deletion syndrome, which presents itself very similar to what you see on the autism spectrum. None of the outbursts or anything like that. But she's nonverbal. She's a sensory seeker. So we have some of the same complications and difficulties that the parents of autistic kids have. And she can be a challenge, but for us, I guess, a neurotypical child would be, maybe less of a challenge. But for us, as people who have fortified ourselves through challenging ourselves on a daily basis in an athletic sense or in building businesses or in whatever else, it's just life. And then our second daughter, we kind of, we knew that we wanted to adopt again. We went through the adoption process 2 other times and had failed adoptions. One, because we were going to adopt out of Hong Kong and the protests started in Hong Kong and they shut down the adoption process. 2, we had a little boy that we were planning on adopting. And because we hadn't had a full year between adoptions, we couldn't get our file in until, whatever it was, like November or something like that. He got matched with a family like in October. So we went through some heartbreak and we went through some challenges of trying to bring children home, but we just kept going back and stepping back into the batter's box until we found our second daughter, my 10-year-old. Now our concern was, I don't know if we can do this physically. Like we're fine with dealing with the mental challenges and everything that comes with having an autistic child, but we weren't sure that we could handle the physical challenges of having a child with cerebral palsy. And, we prayed and we thought about it and we talked about it. We're like, look, we got a 2-story house, but we got 3 years to figure this out. She's 6. It's not going to be until she's 9 or 10 that we really have to figure that out. So we'll get there. And it's the same thing. We just, we said, this is the goal. What do we have to do to get there? How many times do we have to take a hack and chop at that tree before we knock it down? And we just kept going back. So I'm happy to say that we were among the last families to get out of China before the pandemic. And if we had not worked as hard as we did to get to her, she'd still be sitting there waiting for a family. We were there in October of 2019, right before, I mean, the pandemic was going on. We didn't necessarily know it. We were there in China, in country, with a family who was picking up a little girl in Wuhan. And what happens in the adoption process is your first week you spend in your child's province. So in our case, we were in Hunan. So we flew into Beijing and then to Changsha, and we spent a week there getting to know her and going through the adoption process on the China side. And then all the families come back from all over China, and they end up in Guangzhou, which is southern China, kind of close to Hong Kong.
Okay.
Canton. It's also known as Canton. And so you end up in Guangzhou, and you spend that week going to the U.S. consulate and getting all your paperwork done so you can come back to the United States. And so we're all in the same hotel, and we're there with a family they adopted their little girl in Wuhan. We'd never heard of Wuhan, didn't know anything about it.
Not at that point, anyways.
Not at that point. This is October of 2019, and it's crazy in Guangzhou right then, because the Guangzhou Trade Fair is going on, which is one of the biggest trade fairs in the nation. They have like 30 million visitors, like over the course of this trade fair, come and do deals to like do manufacturing deals in China and stuff like that. So there's people from all over the world. And we asked the family from Wuhan, who we kind of befriended. We said, what was Wuhan like? Or just, what was your experience? They're like, it was really quiet. Everything was like shut down. I don't know what's going on there. There's like nobody on the streets. And 3-4 months later, that made a lot more sense. But at the time, we were like, oh, that's weird. That's a strange place. Never heard of it. And so, But we were. I think there was one more group that came through about 2 weeks after us to adopt children. But we were among the last to get out, and they still haven't gone back to adopting children.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. And it fits perfect into y'all's lifestyle. Like, I haven't met your wife yet. I'm going to say yet, because I feel like at some point we'll have to all hang out, especially if we go up to Maine. But
yeah, for sure.
You guys were obviously brought together for a reason. So I'm a strong believer of people are brought together for a reason, just for friendship, like you and I. But to be able to bring you two together, then bring these kids into your lives. And I don't think that these kids would have had a better fit than to be with you two, because it's like you get your kicks with trying to figure out how to handle things, or like different challenges, different adversities. Like, yes, like this, it kind of like spices up your life a little bit. And then it just adds into like another notch of like, hey, this may have been difficult, but then I also was able to accomplish this. And so it helps to build like this psychological resiliency, where it's difficult at first. And then when you do it, you're like, oh, well, I did it. It's easy now. And then you accomplish it. Oh, and then if you look back at your track records, like you've been able to accomplish pretty much anything that I'm aware of that you've been able to set your mind to. Were there any things, because I had to go to the devil's advocate or the opposite of this, anything that you did set out to accomplish that did not work that you wanted to? Just so that people think you're human and not some sort of like superhero.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, and kind of what set me on the path. And I talk about this. I wrote a book, and I talk about this in my book, and how,
it's right above his head for those of you watching. It's right above his
head. And what it's about is essentially when I got out of college, and 9/11 happened, and everything. There was a period of time, about 5 years in my life, where I was waiting for a government job. I knew what I wanted to do, but I wasn't executing. I felt very insignificant. I felt like I wasn't moving the ball along. I got married, it didn't work out. I got divorced. It was like one of those quickie 10-month starter marriages that just kind of reinforced that, this failure of character, this failure of who you're going to be. And it really came down to deciding, like, I'm not going to fail anymore. I'm not going to let life happen to me. I'm going to make life happen for me. And so, yeah, I mean, I failed at my first marriage, but I'm probably more successful as a husband and father because of it. I didn't know how to get where I wanted to go. I didn't know exactly what to do coming out of college. I thought I knew what I wanted to do. And then 9/11 happened, and it changed my entire attitude. And then I had to be patient and play this waiting game. So there were things in life where up until that point, up until I got hired in my first law enforcement job and made that commitment to being the bigger person and being the person who served others, that I was lost. I didn't know exactly who I was going to be, and I couldn't figure that out. And it wasn't until I started doing the hard things that I became addicted to it. It's like, no, like, this is the key to life here. Character equals fate, as Heraclitus says. Like, character equals fate. You're going to become who you want to be by developing the characteristics of the man that you want to be. You're going to start showing up every day as that man, and you're going to become that man. And so, I think all of us kind of experience that at some point in our lives, whether it's in, I was blessed to kind of go through that period of feeling lost and not sure who I was in my late teens, early 20s. I think people can hit that point at any point in their lives. That's why we see so many men have midlife crises and get into their 40s. Like I'm in my early 40s now, where they're kind of like, what am I doing here? I'm struggling. I thought this was the career I wanted, or the family I wanted, the life I wanted. There's never a point in our lives where it's too late to say, I can be who I want to be and become who I want to be, because character is malleable. We can change that. We can become who we want to be by simply determining it and moving towards that. We can get off the path that we're on at any given time. So yeah, I mean, I feel plenty. There's plenty of times, especially in business, early days in entrepreneurship, we had no idea what we were doing when we first started our business.
I love that.
We didn't. We were idiots. We had a running team that we first started. We had to kind of get bullied into coaching people, because my wife and I were out there running marathons and half marathons and all that stuff, and people kept coming up to us and saying, "Hey, can you coach us? We want to do this." And we're like, we're not qualified. We're not qualified. Had this like tremendous sense of impersonator syndrome. Like that's not me. And then finally we started doing it. We charged them like $50 for 3 months. So like pennies on the dollar for the hour, the hours.
Great business model, very sustainable.
Getting up at 5 a.m, like giving people Gatorade and pacing them on a 10-mile run. And, we had no idea what we're doing. I tell people that it took 10 years for us to become overnight successes in the health and fitness space, because we had to trial and error and learn. The difference between us and people who flame out is that, we just kept coming back. I think Thomas Edison said, I'm not a very good inventor. I've just figured out 400 ways that didn't work.
Yeah.
And that's the truth of anything. I tell my daughter this all the time. It would be unreasonable for you to be good. Like when she's complaining about math homework, which she will be in a couple hours from now. I tell her it would be unreasonable for you to be good at this concept because you just learned it today. You need to keep coming back and practicing and practicing and practicing until it would be unreasonable for you to be bad at it. And once you adopt that mindset that if I do this enough, I'm going to, by virtue of showing up, I'm going to succeed, then you start to succeed a hell of a lot more. And that's really the key. I mean, there is no special secret sauce other than keep showing up, keep hacking away, keep doing the work. And eventually you're going to get there. You just have to keep going. Stop looking at the top of the mountain and wondering how people got there. Start walking.
Yeah. I love it, man. Yes, and yes. Well, I know this, but so we talked about the book. So in terms of where people can find you, your website is kristoforhealey.com, right?
Yep.
And then you have your podcasts, right?
The Indispensable Man podcast. Yeah.
Yep. Which I was blessed to be on.
Yeah, it was a great show. People loved it. I got a ton of good feedback.
Yeah. Awesome conversation like this one. So you've got the book, you've got the podcast, you've got the website. Can people reach out to you on Instagram?
Yeah.
Just slather everywhere where people can find you. Because I really hope, really, even just in the last 5-minute snippet of just the mindset and doing this, I want to be able to give something to these people that is tangible, whether it's reaching out to you, buying your book, finding you. Where can I do that, man?
Yeah, just on Instagram, that's probably where I'm the most active on social media. It's at @team_Healey. And the story behind that is once upon a time, that was our triathlon Instagram page back in 2014. It just became mine. So I've kept the name, but at @team_Healey. The book is available on Amazon. It's called Indispensable, A Tactical Plan for the Modern Man. But if you go to my Instagram, there's a link tree in there. You can order a copy. It's got the links to the podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, whatever. But the link tree on my Instagram has everything. DM me, message me. If there's anything I can, if I can be your hype man, let me know. I'm always happy to have those conversations. We do men's retreats about every 6 months. A buddy of mine and I are hosting those up in Kentucky right now, and it's a chance to kind of get guys in a room together and kind of be that hype man for one another. And then I do public speaking. So if you've got a group or you're interested in having somebody come and tell stories about overcoming adversity, that's what I like to talk about and I like to do. And that's kind of my attitude is adversity is a gift. And if you're blessed with having some tough times in your life, you can use that as fuel. If you're not blessed with having tough times in your life, if you're born, with the silver spoon and everything's just Gucci, go out there and find some adversity. go out there and get yourself punched in the face a few times. Not punched in the back of the head, sucker punched. Sorry to hit a raw nerve there.
It's all good. All good.
Go get yourself punched in the face every once in a while, because I think you would agree, based on that adversity actually created an entire path in your life that you might not otherwise have walked down. So I think it's the secret sauce, and all of us have it. Life is hard. It's tough. So you got to go out there and you've got to figure out how to get through things so that when the hard things happen to you that you're not anticipating or expecting, you're prepared. You're mentally prepared.
Yeah. Well, I thank you, man, again for being on here. I was going to say, what was your one parting message, but that was it. That's perfect.
That's it.
So thank you, man, for being on here. Everybody go on Instagram, follow him at team_Healey. Like I said, message him, buy his book, get everything squared away, because this dude is super inspiring. Podcast, again, super inspiring. You interview some great people on there too, besides myself. But really just trying to get in a room or find a way that you can meet one-on-one with Chris here, because it's like when you and I met, it was like we had known each other for like 50 years. It was like two dudes going back as far as, and the conversation becomes super easy. And the way that he's speaking right here virtually in a podcast is exactly how he shows up. And it's amazing. And I want people to be able to feel that. So see if you could find a way to get in a room with this dude, whether it's one of the retreats or just stalk him, find him at his new house.
Yeah.
Show up at his doorstep, knock on his door or something. But honestly, man, thank you again for taking the time out to spend an hour or so hanging out with me today. And
absolutely.
And I really appreciate it.
A lot of fun, Jacque. Looking forward to catching up in Maine sooner or later, or Arizona or Texas, wherever our paths
we'll make it
cross
happen
again. Yeah.
We'll make it happen, man.